So now that I got the rant out of my system, I'll get back to talking about what's going on, but this time I'm going to focus more on China. I haven't done a China video in a while, but I will talk about Russia briefly with regard to China in the beginning. So both China and India obviously have been powerful partners to Russia throughout the war. They've declined to institute sanctions, and they continue to purchase oil and energy from Russia. Now, in the last meeting they just had, both Modi and Xi spoke with Putin, and both leaders expressed concerns about the way the war is going. They both said that the war needs to be ended, and even Modi spoke out against it. So Putin is now feeling he needs to change the momentum now. It's all been in Ukraine's favor. Criticism from allies like China and India clearly puts more pressure on him. And more experts are believing that Putin escalated the war in Ukraine to include this mobilization because of that pressure. The mobilization came just days after his visit to China and India. I suspect what Putin heard was, find a way to finish this war quickly, wind it down, because we're not going to remain on your side for another 6 months of brutality, and it's causing instability. Both China and India rely on stability in the systems, the inputs of logistics and progress for them to be successful, more so than the United States and even Europe needs. So Putin has to balance that. He balances it with not pissing his people off by broadly starting a massive war in Europe, with the wishes of Xi and Modi to wind this down. The reality is this mobilization will not change the course of the war anytime soon. And this is despite rumors that Putin secretly ordered 3 times more call-ups than what was announced, so potentially up to 900,000 people. Russia's mustering system can't handle 300,000 people, let alone 900,000 if that's what is to be true. They just don't have the capability. So nothing's really going to change on the battlefield. And I don't know how Putin's going to react. He may be just trying to show this to buy time through the winter to see hopefully he can turn the tides of favor in Europe against the European wish to isolate Russia's energy and kind of bring them back into the fold. So we'll see what happens, but likely that is what took place between China, India, and Russia. Now, moving on, at least 154 Chinese scientists that worked for the U.S. government on various national laboratory projects over the last 2 decades were reportedly recruited to scientific work in China, some of which helped advance technologies such as drones, hypersonic missiles, deep earth penetrating warheads, quiet submarines, etc. Many of the scientists were of Chinese origin. They came over, studied in the U.S., worked for the U.S. government, and then returned, often being paid as much as $1 million to participate in these Chinese government talent programs. And it's designed to recruit Chinese scientists to return to China. These have been identified, and actually I read about these in a book called The World According to China, and it was a very good book, actually. And they've been identified as potential problems for national security for the U.S. And the U.S. has responded by implementing adopting rigorous vetting, counterintelligence reviews, restricting the participation of some foreign talent programs that aren't vetted through the U.S. The Department of Energy also implements procedures to ensure compliance with U.S. export licensing requirements, etc. So it's tightened down, but this showed over the last few decades that it wasn't as tight as it needed to be. So a lot of it has been fixed, but it was just a report that talked about what the U.S. could have lost to China in that regard. The U.S. Navy and the Canadian Navy both made a routine transit through the Taiwan Strait on Tuesday, as China has seemingly backed off rhetoric lately to de-escalated its military maneuvers. China said with regard to resolving the Taiwan question, realizing the complete unification of China, we have strategic composure and historic patience, and we are also full of confidence it will someday bring Taiwan under its control, partly because compatriots there want it to happen. That's actually a view that a lot of Taiwanese polling shows isn't necessarily the case. A survey in August showed that the Taiwan government found that 2/3 of respondents said that Beijing was unfriendly, and more than a quarter said that they wanted immediate independence votes so that they could completely declare independence. Only 10% supported unification at some point. So it seems like China is backing off. What I suspect is a lot of the policies that Trump implemented, Biden is continuing with regard to China when it comes to being tough on China. There's not really a lot of change when it comes to that regard. So I think China, seeing that the United States is going to remain tough on China with regard to its human rights violations, its intellectual property theft, its saber rattling surrounding Taiwan, they may be backing off a little bit to try and take a bit more softer tone, which may coincide with the fact that they are telling Russia to wind this down. They want to be seen as an international player and partner to peace and stability rather than being in this, what I've called the new axis of evil with up there on Castle Grayskull with Russia and Iran and North Korea. The leading chip-making nations, that is, which is the United States, Korea, and Taiwan, and Japan, are forming an alliance. This is in part to secure semiconductor supply chains, but also to cut off China from getting the most cutting-edge technology. Now, the U.S. did a similar alliance with European countries as well, specifically in Germany, as well as Baltic nations, which, for those of you in America that don't know, Estonia has a pretty good tech sector as well, to lock out Russia as well as China. So the U.S. is shoring up this advanced chip-making capability for its own purposes, but also to keep China and Russia out of there, because as of right now, they're seen as not playing nice in the world order. So we're going to see more of this. The U.S. has incredible influence and it has a lot of money. So it can push these types of policies to lock out especially Russia, who is struggling right now, but also China if it's not careful. And we saw that with a U.S. alliance in chip making with right in China's backyard in Taiwan. So China's mortgage boycott may be getting more and more dangerous for China as authorities are trying to stem the crisis with measures. Now, latest data shows 342 major residence projects in 119 cities are at risk of collapsing, not collapsing like physically, but their financing collapsing. And because of these boycotts, they're all being boycotted. No mortgages being paid on them. This is up from 320 in 100 cities just a month ago. Now, China invests roughly 30 to 40% of its GDP into property and infrastructure, and not receiving repayments for such investments could be extraordinarily problematic. 1/3 of the investments China has are considered bad loans at this point. So China's tried to diffuse the problem by building measures such as cutting interest rates, asking banks to meet reasonable financing needs for developers, offering special loans, etc. But they really haven't done anything to stem the flow of real estate collapse. They may be on the verge of a major real estate bubble pop. Couple that with home sales being down 30%, and they aren't growing the sector fast enough to overcome the losses from these bad investments. As a result, the income from all 31 of China's provinces recorded 7 or more months of losses this year, which is significant. The yuan is also set for its longest losing streak against the dollar this year, after the central bank sought to support the currency with stronger than expected fixings in every single session for nearly a month. So basically, China's trying to fix its currency by manipulating it against the dollar, which they've always done. We've always known that so that they can maintain some sort of parity. Now, the yuan slid for 4 straight days and almost hit its weakest point of the allowed trading range, which they give about 2% in either direction, higher or lower than the dollar, before they reset the baseline for it. So for those of you that don't know, China actually doesn't run a floating currency, which is why it will never become the global reserve currency, and it's pegged within 2% in either direction of the dollar. They do this for trade purposes. Now, it suggests that Beijing doesn't have as much control over the movement of the currency relative to the market as they had hoped, as the dollar continues to remain strong, especially with these interest rate hikes that just came up. Economists, because of this, are increasingly pessimistic about China's outlook for the next year. They don't expect any rebound to be smooth. The zero COVID policies cause problems. They've lowered the growth forecast for China by about 0.8%. However, it is expected to still grow faster than the U.S., but not by much. and it likely will keep the U.S. ahead of China in absolute GDP. And then finally, Hong Kong is ending its quarantine, which will be kind of a test bed for the future of China, as the city is going to strap border controls starting on Monday, which is much earlier than expected. This ends 2.5 years of isolation from the rest of the world, but the Chinese border remains effectively shut to Hong Kong. And that's it.